She's the vice president of the United States. If she's incompetent, if her skill set doesn't match up with real issues happening today, domestically and in terms of foreign policy, with China, with Russia, with Iran, and so forth, that is a problem today. It's not about her wanting to run for president in 2024 or whether she'll be Biden's running mate in 2024. This is the game the media play. We have a problem here and now, and that's her.
This is where freedom rings.
If you believe in America, if you believe in the Constitution empowers us. It's a new day. America's back. America's back, and America's going to get strong again. We're going to defend America, and we're going to defend our interests.
Liberty's voice, Levin TV.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Levin TV. By the way, the rats are jumping the sinking ship. That would be the USS Biden-Titanic. And look, I'm not one of these guys that says it's a lock in a year from now in this midterm election. We have to fight like we're behind. You look at the great generals throughout history, they never took anything for granted. You can't fight like you're going to win. You have to fight like you're losing or you're behind, and you need to win. And hopefully that's what the repubes are doing, but I don't trust them completely, the establishment Republicans. Nonetheless, it's pretty obvious Kamala Harris is way over her head. It was obvious before she became the VP nominee of the Democrat Party. Even the Democrats realized that. She was the first out. She had like 1% support. Well, look at her background. What has she actually done with her life? She was a DA. Well, that was handed to her. She was a attorney general where she was a disaster. She becomes the senator from California. Well, if you're a left-wing Democrat, that's not so hard. 2 years as a senator. It's kind of like Obama, 2 years as a senator. She finally finds the restroom, and then she's nominated. She wasn't nominated because what's between her ears, and that's the problem. And by the way, neither was Biden. If Biden was nominated for what was between his ears, he'd be nominated for a institutionalization. Nonetheless, the knives are out now, and I think they're out in part not only because she's a disaster, but because Biden and his insular circle, they're looking for excuses. They're looking for somebody to condemn for Biden's disaster. Look, really, the job of the vice president is really nothing. And she's lived up to that. She's done nothing. And she's done nothing well. And people don't like her personally. She comes off with that cackle. She's got something going on there. You know, I don't know what it is, but even her own party's turning on her. And I'll tell you what, Democrats who want to be president, they look at Biden, they look at her, they think it's an open path come 2024. I believe they really do. Anyway, even CNN reports on this because they got an exclusive. Remember what CNN's all about. They'll do anything to protect Joe Biden, even if it means throwing Kamala Harris over the bridge. And that's what's going on. And of course, they go to Jim Acosta. Now, who could be doing this? Well, Ron Klain is the chief of staff, him. You notice you never hear from Susan Rice. Susan Rice is a big player in this White House. She's a huge player. You never hear from her. They're the ones you got to be careful about, among others. So let's take a listen. Go.
The CNN exclusive. Insiders reveal for the first time tension and frustration behind the scenes between Vice President Kamala Harris and the White House. The accounts come from nearly 36 current and former Harris aides, administration officials, Democratic operatives, donors, and outside advisors who spoke to CNN about the complex reality inside the White House. On one side, members of Harris's inner circle who believe she's being sidelined and set up to fail instead of being positioned to be a future president. One former high-level Harris aide put it this way, we put this up on screen, they're consistently sending her out there on losing issues in the wrong situations.
Stop. That's pretty amazing right there. She was handed a huge job, immigration and the border. They're consistently sending her out there on losing issues in the wrong situations for her skill set. Folks, when you're president of the United States, you don't get to choose which issues, and it's not about a skill set. Your skill set doesn't match the issues that you're dealing with. This isn't third grade. We're not in some psychiatrist's office. She has to be able to fill in for the president of the United States. So sending her out there on losing issues, she could have grabbed that immigration issue and done something with it. But in this administration, because they believe in LACCRIT, that is an open border, that anybody who comes across the border is an indigenous person with an indigenous background, has a right to be here. The borders are wide open. They have no intention of closing them and so forth. That's why it's a losing job. But she could have stood up to this, but she won't, because she's part of the same radical ideology as those who are pushing lat-crit. So that was always going to be a bad issue for her. And what do they mean, her skill set? What the hell is her skill set? Nobody knows, because she has none. Go.
CNN has also learned Harris has told confidants she feels constrained in what she's able to do. The mood, apparently summed up by this satirical headline from The Onion, goes like this, that Harris defenders sometimes pass around when they're feeling annoyed. White House urges Kamala Harris to sit at computer all day in case emails come through. Of course, it's not that bad inside the White House. But on the other side of things, you have West Wing staffers who say they're completely exasperated, throwing up their hands at what they perceive as some of Harris's awkward mistakes, including some cringy answers on Israel and the border crisis. Sources tell CNN there's also the belief that Harris's staff has repeatedly failed her and left her exposed. I'm joined now by the journalist behind all of this reporting, CNN senior reporter Isaac Dovere. Isaac, great stuff as always from you. Let's begin with what's going on with Harris's office. What's with all the finger pointing behind the scenes? As I was describing it to somebody, this is what political reporting was like when we were on Earth One,
right, before
Donald Trump came along. Sometimes this goes on behind the scenes at administration, and so it's not too surprising that it's happening now, but very interesting.
It does, but of course the particular situation here is that Kamala Harris is perceived as someone who is likely to be running for president in the future. Why is she perceived that way? She's run in the past. She's the incumbent vice president. Also, Joe Biden will be 82 years old in 2024. He says he's running for president for re-election. There's no reason to not take him at his word, but if that doesn't turn out to be the way that things go, she could be running for president in a year.
Right.
This could be, and she could be on the ballot herself, if not as the presidential nominee, as Biden's running mate. Again, needing to validate someone who'll be saying to the country, keep me in power till I'm 86 years old. There's a lot of political weight on her for that. And then, of course, there's the historical weight.
Can we stop a second? You notice that everything's a game? She's the vice president of the United States. If she's incompetent, if her skill set doesn't match up with real issues happening today, domestically and in terms of foreign policy, with China, with Russia, with Iran, and so forth, that is a problem today. It's not about her wanting to run for president in 2024 or whether she'll be Biden's running mate in 2024. This is the game the media play. We have a problem here and now, and that's her. And by the way, that's him. They're not exactly the dynamic duo, quite the opposite. They're the dodo bird duo. That's what they are. And so the problem is we have a president who is incapable in many respects of doing his job properly. So we have this invisible staff of radicals. And then we have a vice president who's not capable of stepping in. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this, ladies and gentlemen, but here we are. Go.
Look to her as the first first woman in power in this position, the first woman of color in this position.
Oh, wait a minute. Well, according to Michael Eric Dyson and Jonathan Capehart, why do you keep saying that she's the first black woman in this position as vice president? Don't you remember how they attacked Winsome Sears? Oh, you think you got absolution because you supported Kamala Harris? Is that it? You think interracial marriage between her and her husband, who's Jewish, you think that gives you absolution? Oh, no. Why is it that when it comes to Democrats and leftists, it does give them absolution, if you will, their language. But when it comes to a naturalized citizen like Winsome Sears, who comes from Jamaica, who served in the Marines, who started a small business and was just elected the first female and black lieutenant governor of Virginia, that's all a charade. Or as John Kerry would say, charade. But when it comes to Kamala Harris, who doesn't have nearly the brain power of Winsome Sears, it's a big issue because this guy keeps talking about it. Go ahead.
All of that, what goes into that, and people wanting to see her really succeed and get out.
How come people don't want to see Winsome Sears succeed in the media? Because they're biased, they are profoundly corrupt. Go ahead.
In this piece, which we should again mention, sourced by dozens of people, you also reference these Aaron Sorkin-like rumors that Biden could replace her. That sounds very far-fetched, but when the poll numbers get where they are, like they are right now inside the White House, I know this from covering the Obama administration and the Trump administration, people start talking about all sorts of things.
Yeah,
Maybe she'll replace Biden. Maybe she'll want to run with somebody else. He's not exactly the greatest president in the world. In fact, he's one of the worst ever. Go ahead.
This is it says in the piece, this is an Aaron Sorkin-style rumor that Biden could appoint her to the Supreme Court and then put her on the court.
Okay, Biden doesn't get to appoint somebody to the Supreme Court. He gets to nominate somebody to the Supreme Court. What do you think the Republicans would do with that? And here's what I don't get. If she's too dim-witted to be vice president, whose responsibilities are basically to take different trips to see foreign leaders the president doesn't want to see, or to go to funerals the president doesn't want to go to, or to sit around and wait for the president to get sick or die. If she's not capable of even doing that, why would you want her on the Supreme Court? Maybe I'll put her on the Supreme Court where these hugely important decisions are considered, and you're supposed to be very intelligent to be able to write and to be able to think them through and to deal with oral argument and all the rest. So why would you bump her up from vice president to the Supreme Court of the United States? Go ahead.
Pick someone else to be his running mate going into re-election in 2024. Is that likely to happen? No. But it's the kind of thing that's going around in circles now because there's such a sense of frantic panic of what's going on with her political prospects. You see a poll that came out last week that had Biden at his lowest numbers yet, but had Kamala Harris 10 points below that. She was at 28%. That means that there is a real problem that she has. And you see, when you get to those sorts of numbers, that means that the base of voters is draining away from her. And that's a problem that she's going to have to deal with. That's a problem that the Biden administration is going to have to deal with if they want things to be better.
So Biden's at 38%, which is unheard of, and she's at 28%, which is unheard of. The truth is, as awful as she is, and she's awful, it's Biden who's in charge, at least theoretically. He's the president of the United States. He has the constitutional authority. She does not. These horrific decisions that are being made in every respect across all issues are harming not just Republicans, but independents and Democrats. In other words, the country. They had this big event yesterday where they signed this $1.25 trillion bill. They call it an infrastructure bill, where only a small percentage of it actually goes to infrastructure, a small percentage of it. And they're celebrating, and the media is excited, and it goes on and on and on. I thought to myself, Washington, D.C. celebrating a massive bill, massive addition to our debt, undermining future generations, adding to inflation, creating more government power. Well, of course they're celebrating. We have nothing to celebrate. Washington is celebrating itself. Now we move on to Kyle Rittenhouse. Now, I watched a lot of the closing argument yesterday and into the evening. Even during the closing argument, the prosecution was a mess. They said that, what is this? Holding a rifle? There's rifles for right-handed people and left-handed people. No, there's not. Yes, there are. There are firearms for right-handed people and left-handed people. Not all the time, but certainly you can, and many of them are. I know I have one. And a lot of left-handed people, it's like golf clubs. They have them too for left-handed people. This prosecution didn't even know the law when it came to guns. It amazed me that this count 6, wasn't thrown out at the beginning of the trial. That is, that he was in the unlawful possession of a rifle. Well, it turns out under Wisconsin law, you're not allowed to have, if you're a minor, 17, like a sawed-off shotgun or something. But if the rifle is beyond a certain length, you are allowed to use it legally. And he was. And so that count was thrown out at the very end of the trial. Now, you would think that the prosecution would know what the rules are, right? But apparently not. So Rittenhouse was in the lawful possession of that AR-15, and it turns out the man that he shot in the bicep was in the unlawful possession of a Glock 9. And then when you think about the riots that took place and everything else, you're listening to the prosecution slow down the tape, slow down the timeline when these decisions are made in nanoseconds, and the shooting of even 4 bullets at Rosenbaum, the initial perpetrator, happened within 9/10 of a second. You're not required to pull the trigger once. When you're pulling the trigger, you're trying to protect yourself. You don't know if you're going to kill that person or not. It's certainly possible. It's a gun with a bullet, but you're trying to defend yourself. It's self-defense. And so whether you pull the trigger once or 4 times really is not determinative of anything. And yet they're trying to make like it is. Did you know that the prosecution dropped a bunch of charges against Gross Krutz, or Gross Krauts? I prefer the latter. And before the trial, so it couldn't all be brought up, and it wasn't all brought up. And another person who had a weapon, do you know they didn't charge that person either? Because they wanted to use that person as a witness? I mean, they're really playing games as prosecution. This is what happens when the mob is in charge. Now, I pray to God at the time that I'm doing this program that this young man is found innocent of all charges, the remaining charges. Because frankly, if this isn't self-defense, I don't know what the hell is. And let me just add this point. What do you think would happen if all this video didn't exist? The iPhones, the store security cameras, the FBI plane up above. What do you think would have happened if all this video didn't exist? He'd be put away for the rest of his life without the opportunity for parole. Period. Because the narrative, the story told would be that of the government. Understand something else too, which I don't think the legal analysts are really explaining. It's the role of a prosecutor to gather as much of the evidence as he or she can through an investigation, using police officers and so forth and so on, forensics, so you don't charge the wrong person, or you're not advancing a political agenda, whether it's a racist agenda in some cases, or a political agenda in this case because they wanted to hang somebody's hide. The job of the prosecutor is to represent the state in what the state believes is a crime committed against one of its citizens. It's not the job of a prosecutor to be an advocate at all costs and for all purposes. And so the first blush here is that the prosecutor is supposed to take his or her time and go through the evidence. They never did. It was 36 to 48 hours. They charged him with these murders, with a gun crime, which is absolutely outrageous. They didn't have most of the video. They hadn't interviewed most of the witnesses. They didn't have most of the information they needed to make a determination if this is a capital crime, to send a 17-year-old to prison for the rest of his life. That's number one. Number two, they act like these rioters were perfectly nice people. All you had to do is reason with them. So you were hit in the head once with a skateboard, then you were hit in the head twice with a skateboard. That doesn't mean you can use deadly force. Of course it does. It's like being hit in the head with a baseball bat. I mean, that is an assault, and then a second assault. And the way these mobs work, and you can see it with Antifa and Black Lives Matter and so forth, they swirl around the target. They really do. They swirl around the target. You ever watch these various shows about when you look at the Sahara and you look at these various documentaries and so forth, how they take down their prey? It's very similar. It's very similar. They come at you so fast and in so many directions you can't defend yourself. I'm really impressed, and I'm going to use that word whether people like it or not, on how cool this kid was under attack from all sides. There was a massive, violent riot taking place. The police even pulled back to draw a line. They'd move up, then they would move back. They moved up and moved back. This is night 3. All 3 of the perpetrators that Kyle Rittenhouse shot had long criminal records, violent criminal records. I'm somebody who has weapons. These guys have weapons. Can you imagine a more clear case of 3 self-defense issues here? I can't. So people say the prosecution was incompetent. Now, the prosecution was political. And so because it was a political prosecution, and in my view didn't have strong cases, they looked incompetent. They were trying to do everything they could to get around the Constitution, to get around statutes, to get a mistrial because of their star witness and what a fraud he turned out to be. That's what they were doing. So this case should never have been brought. We'll see what happens. I mean, as of right now, I don't know what happens. Now, Joy Reid, as you know, I've talked about her many, many times, including on my Fox show this past Sunday. Joy Reid, as far as I'm concerned, hates America. She is a racist, in my view, and a bigot. And by the way, when it comes to Joy Reid, her past tweets on social media pan out. In other words, support everything I'm saying. But so does her constant haranguements on TV, and she's had it so badly. She went to Harvard, by the way. So let's listen to what she has to see, because from her eyes, everything is about white racism, period. Go.
So I was talking with my brilliant sister friend, Erin Haynes, of the 19th with the asterisk, on Wednesday night, the evening after Kyle Rittenhouse tearfully testified at his murder trial in Wisconsin, like a mini Brett Kavanaugh. And we were talking about...
Whoa. See what I mean? Like a mini Brett Kavanaugh. I was crying. This is a murder trial where this kid's life is on the line, whether he's ever going to be free again. And she's very, very cavalier. Is that the way she talks about other people who are on a stand or accused of murder and that sort of thing? Did she ever say that about anybody else? No. She's a bigot. Go ahead.
Case reminds us so much of the George Zimmerman trial, in which Zimmerman, an adult...
Why do we have to talk about the George Zimmerman trial? You don't need to argue in the alternative. First of all, from her perspective, George Zimmerman's Hispanic, Trayvon Martin, is African American. In the case of Rittenhouse, Jacobson, Huber, and Grosskreutz, they're all white. So from her perspective, racial perspective, what does one have to do with the other? You see the title? American Vigilantism. American vigilante? Why, is America vigilante now? I mean, the whole country? And was this kid a vigilante? He goes there to try and help people who are hurt. He has one of these Red Cross bags with him. He goes there with a fire extinguisher to put out fires, and he has his rifle because somebody asked him to protect their car lot. Does that sound like a vigilante? She's such a liar. She's so disgusting. Go ahead.
On July 13th, 2013, of murdering a teenager, 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Much like the Rittenhouse case, the Zimmerman case was fundamentally about American vigilantism and whether it is legal in America for a person not in law enforcement to take it upon themselves.
Now that's hilarious. They hate law enforcement, which they say is systemically racist. Now when you have American citizens protecting their own neighborhoods and defending themselves, then she says they don't call in law enforcement. You understand what I'm saying? How mind-boggling, outrageous this is? Go ahead.
Arm themselves with a gun and mete out what they view as justice.
But people aren't meting out what they view as justice. It's called self-defense. And you have a right to defend yourself against individuals who are going to attack you. But in the case of Rittenhouse, she wants to relitigate the other case that went to a jury. In the case of Rittenhouse, he's meting out justice, don't you? No, he was running. He was running for his life. He was attacked. He defended himself. Go.
Self-defense and investigating property crime. According to the laws maneuvered into place by the NRA,
into place by the NRA. Self-defense laws have existed before there was an NRA. They've existed before there was the United States of America. They've existed before there were colonists in this country. Self-defense laws exist in almost every country except totalitarian countries that disarm their population and don't believe they should have self-defense. So according to her, if you have a carry weapon license, as I do, you're already a perpetrator. Because if you use that weapon to defend yourself or your home or your community, you're not only a racist, but you're a perpetrator. Go ahead.
That is indeed legal in America. Statistically, mainly if you're white.
What? Mainly if you're white? I'm telling you, she's mentally unhinged. You have a right to self-defense mainly if you're white? Well, can you demonstrate that through statistics? We know that the vast majority of murders in this country are done to young black men by young black men. She never talks about this. This is something that needs attention so we can try and fix it. To me, I've always said this is a civil rights issue, the extent to which black young men are killing black young men, these gangs and so forth and so on. What is white? What's this white stuff all the time? She doesn't present statistics, so you basically have a right to defend yourself, mainly if you're white. Go ahead.
History on the American continent from 1619 to today is an almost unbroken record of vigilantism in the name of defending property rights.
My God.
Whether that property was human and African and enslaved, or in the form of wives or daughters who had no individual...
All right, let's stop. We invited her on my radio show. She never responded. I had my people invite her again. She never responded. I would do virtually anything to debate Joy Reid. Virtually anything. Virtually anything. I'm happy to debate slavery. It's not whether you're for or against it. It's how it was addressed, ultimately, in the United States. You know, it's very interesting. The British outlawed slavery in their own country, but they wouldn't stop importing slaves into the United States. They would take these big boats and go to the west coast of Africa, where tribes would fight each other and tribes would enslave other tribes. And then they would sell the slaves, black, to the British, among others, other Europeans, and then the British would ship them to the United States. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying it's a repulsive, unconscionable thing. But you've heard of the supply chain? Well, this was a sickening supply chain. That you had slaves taken in Africa, sold to Europeans, who would take them to their own countries or sell them to other countries. And this is the way it worked. You even had on the Ivory Coast and other areas, you even had pirates who would take these ships, British and Americans, and enslave the white sailors and sell them off too, which is one of the reasons Thomas Jefferson sent the Navy to fight the pirates. Slavery. So I'm not trying to get into a long discussion of slavery. It's something I've studied a long time. I'm more than happy to debate her about that issue. But the United States, there's a reason why everybody wants to come to the United States. Everybody. Why are all these Haitians trying to come into the United States? Why are people from Africa trying to come into the United States? Why are people from south of the border trying to come to the United States? I'll even go beyond. Why are people from the Pacific region, Chinese and others, trying to come to the United States? These are people who are not white Europeans, trying desperately to get into the United States. Because it's a great country, that's why. It is a fantastic country. Joy Reid should know that, but she doesn't care. And she keeps going on there. There's not a show that she does that doesn't talk about if you're white and white this and white that. That's why I said in my monologue on Life, Liberty, and Levin, and I've said here, people like her, and there's many of them, of different races on TV, are given platforms as hosts, as regular contributors, as guests. These are racist platforms that are dividing the country, that are fueling riots and hate, and that make it impossible for this country to come together, which we can and should. Which we can and should. You know, interracial marriage is sky high right now. The so-called white suburbs, most of them are 40% minority. Things are happening in this country that are happening spontaneously. People fall in love with somebody of the opposite race, go ahead and marry them. Nobody gives a damn anymore. Nobody thinks about it. It's a wonderful thing. This country really is a melting pot. But there are people out there who hate the idea of a melting pot. They are more segregationist, they are more separatist, and they're on the hard left, or the Klan, of course, and the neo-Nazis. But the hard left, people on platforms like this. Comcast owns MSNBC. Why would you put somebody like this on there? Go ahead.
Who had no individual property or voting rights of their own, and whether it was physical land. America is a country formed by men who threw off the European kings to become little kings of their own.
No, that's not what they did in the least. Did you read the Constitution? That's the funny thing. If George Washington wanted to be king, he could have been king. He didn't. If John Adams wanted to be king after him, he could have been king. He didn't. Thomas Jefferson, he could have been king. He didn't. They fought with each other politically and otherwise. They didn't create a monarchy, and they weren't little kings. Go ahead.
With land and slaves and women under their charge.
Land and slaves and women. Do we not believe in private property rights? If there's no private property rights, what is it then? It's a totalitarian governmental regime that owns everything. Private property rights. Does she even know what private... Listen to me. She talks about slavery and property in the same breath. Property. What did Madison say about property? What have I said about property in my various books? Property is the representation of your intellectual and physical labor. Of your intellectual and physical labor. That's why slavery was so horrific and inhumane, among other reasons. But if you don't have a nation that represents the intellectual and the physical labor of the human being, then you're all slaves. I mean, then the government should tax us each at 100% and force us to do certain things we don't want to do. People believe in private property. All private property is the manifestation of your time on earth using your mental and physical labor abilities to access something. You know, you ought to go back and read Abraham Lincoln and the speeches he gave. And one of the things Abraham Lincoln said in a famous speech in 1858, but other speeches all the time as well, what he said was, thank you to the founders of the nation for the Declaration of Independence. Because he said, and I paraphrase, the men at that time, some sought but could not succeed in abolishing slavery. Slavery existed all over the world. Some of them wanted to abolish it right there and then. Even in the Declaration of Independence, the language was taken out because some of the southern states, Georgia and South Carolina, would not participate. And so they rewrote it. That was Thomas Jefferson who put that in there, even though he had slaves. A lot of them gave slaves their freedom upon their death. I'm not patting them on the head, I'm just explaining history. But Lincoln said, but for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that followed, slavery would have persisted. Slavery would have gone on and on and on. What does the Declaration of Independence talk about? Unalienable rights for all human beings. Does it talk about race? Not one word about race. Where do these unalienable rights come from? God, the Creator. This is sort of what Jason Whitlock was talking about on the Sunday show on Fox when he was explaining. If you don't believe in truth, you don't embrace God, you don't embrace the Declaration, then what are you? Then you get Joy Reid. You get people like this who just keep burning things down and trashing things. The world begins today. I'm not going to look at history. I'm not going to look at the perspective of history. That's what Marx did. Because you can always look back on human behavior throughout the decades, the centuries, even the ages. You're going to find terrible imperfections. Terrible imperfections in humans and in societies. And then if you use those to destroy the existing society and say everything begins today, you are regurgitating Marx. And when everything begins today, that means you have to have a clean slate. If you have a clean slate, that means everything you work for, everything you believe in, has to be destroyed, regardless of your race. Your property has to be taken because we can't believe in property rights. You heard what she just said. So much was produced by slaves 150, 200 years ago. And so you must destroy the society. Was a white dominant society? Even though white dominant society, the eternal truths are eternal truths, whether you're white or any other color. They come from God. That's the belief. That's my belief. So it really doesn't matter. But that said, that's where she's coming from. Now, how much injustice, how much poverty, how much torture, how much genocide exists from the philosophy she embraces? 100 million human beings have died under Marxism. Billions have been enslaved under Marxism. So many have starved to death under Marxism, have been tortured, have been enslaved. Ask the Uyghurs. One of the things Joy Reid does not do is talk about slavery today. Slavery in the Congo and the Sudan. Slavery in communist China. slavery in parts of the Middle East, the slave trade that goes on in the United States, the sex slave trade that needs to be confronted and wrestled to the ground. We have slavery today. She doesn't discuss it. The NBA won't discuss it. And I could go on and on and on. But I won't.